Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. For the last of my reviews of Convergence tie-ins, I've saved not necessarily the best for last, but certainly the one that had me the most concerned. Largely because of the characters involved being screwed over by DC in the past, and also me not knowing anything about the writer's previous work. I'm taking issue with Convergence Batgirl, with Stephanie Brown in the title role, with a couple of familiar faces along for the ride. Alongside art by Rick Leonardi, Mark Pennington, and Steve Buccellato, will Alicia Whitney do a worse job than James Tynion IV? I honestly don't think that's possible, but let's see if this story makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. Issue number 1's cover sees Batgirl alongside Black Bat and Red Robin, looking outward in front of a domed city while Gorilla Grodd roars over the horizon. Maybe they don't know he's grown to kaiju size and are waiting for him from the other direction. We start in a desert, where Steph stands guard as her allies rest, narrating basically her crime-fighting career, starting out going full throttle, finding out you're not as good as you thought, but dealing with it nevertheless. She wakes Cassandra to take over sentry duty, while she takes a much-needed bathroom break. Red Robin, unmasked like the rest of them, asks where she thinks she's going, and boy howdy does she not care for his implication that she might abandon her city even though she's out of practice, and leaves in a huff. Tim tells Cassie he's not mad at Steph, but the situation, wondering why someone that hasn't donned their costume in a year was chosen instead of either of them to defend their city. Cassie thinks that perhaps it's because Steph is less predictable. You mean she's not going to let her reality's Gotham die because of incompetence and daddy issues? Imagine that! It's like she's a good character. Or at least well written. As she wonders if Batman ever has trouble when nature calls, Steph is in the process of dropping her pants when... she's attacked by Catman. Inappropriate timing doesn't begin to cover it. I mean, okay, in a tactical sense, if you're trying to take someone out when they're most vulnerable is an optimal choice, but after trying to play it cool like she had tricked her foe into thinking her defenses were down, she knees him in the crotch saying her entourage isn't there to help her. Yet that's when Tim shows up, and it's distraction enough for Catman to take advantage with a kick. Double R had a reason for going after Steph, but can't think of why at the moment, and therefore asks if he's just not very bright. I see two explanations for Tim's demeanor here. One is that Miss Whitney isn't totally aware of how Tim Drake would act in the situation, comparing her to other writers that have tackled him before Flashpoint, or Harper Rowe's writer's pet aura from the Eternal books has a retroactive effect, making him a moron even here. As Batgirl continues the fight, Catsie explains he'd rather be leading his resistance forces against the telepathic ape, Grodd. He's being chatty as a delaying tactic, and notes that Tim is smiling for some reason. Wondering if Red Robin got spored by a flower and it's affecting his brain, Stephanie's instincts tell her that Black Bat is in trouble, so she masks up and leaves. I was initially very critical of the fact that it took Tim this long to put his mask on, since he saw Stephanie fighting Catman. She at least got snuck up on. She has an excuse. But given the circumstances they're in, where the guy they're fighting is from a completely different reality that might be going bye-bye soon, I suppose it's not that big of a deal. The three of them arrive to see Cassie avoiding Grodd's attacks, while Steph begins thinking she was chosen by mistake to be a champion, getting confused by her abductor for Babs or Cass, perhaps. We jump back a year in the early days of Gotham being cut off from the rest of the world. Despite encouragement from Cassandra and Tim, the chaos still got to her. People going nuts, killing themselves, one guy even setting loose zoo animals. And the guy ended up being killed by the very lion he freed, which in turn was shot by a cop. And it was this event that led Stephanie to strip down and walk away in her underwear. You know, there are a lot of reasons why the dramatic moment of removing your superhero costume for one final time should be relegated to the privacy of one's own home. The elements of the weather, dangerous situations as you trek back, perverts with cameras. Without having to prove herself as Batgirl, Stephanie embraced being a nurse, seen helping a young woman give birth, something in which she has personal experience. Pre-Flashpoint, Stephanie got pregnant, which kept her out of the vigilante life for a while. She saw the pregnancy through and gave the child up for adoption, and in retrospect was a pretty inspiring time in her arc. So glad that was sacrificed so she could be Harper Rose bootlick and sleep with the guy she knew for 5 minutes. Thanks, bad writing! As she and the doctor leave for the night, they're confronted by Killer Moth, who, incidentally, was the first villain Barbara Gordon faced as Batgirl. Intentional hint, maybe? Well, he holds them up, only for young Miss Brown to fight back verbally. She understands he's got his own issues, but what he's doing isn't right, and directs the dumbfounded Moth to a Lutheran church where a focus group meets every Friday. Red Robin is seen having watched the incident, and it's not really clear if he's going to subdue Moth or not. Stephanie is relaxing in her apartment, thinking that life without a cape taught her the costume theatrics give the impression of wanting to escalate a conflict. I suppose that's one way to consider it, though I don't really agree entirely. I mean, would it be that much of a stretch to say the same thing of uniformed police officers? That's when her roommate, Cassandra Cain, returns home from stopping some criminals from cordoning off a subway system, one of whom punched her in the mammary gland. Seems weird, but I guess it could happen for a female vigilante. Though with Cassie's skills, it's even more of a mystery how it happened at all. Know who to block that? The real Cassie Cain! Steph offers a reading lesson, but Cass isn't much in the mood. The news isn't offering anything new on the dome, and Cassandra is hungry for meat, specifically the guinea pig they intended to breed for food. But Stephanie went and got attached, naming it Proserpine, so she naturally objects, even willing to fight the superior warrior over it, remembering full well that Batman has said Black Bat could potentially beat even him. Some readers have made the criticism that Cassie wouldn't kill a guinea pig for meat, citing her no-killing rule and the many extremes she went to uphold it. While I don't remember her being a staunch vegetarian, I suppose it's possible that she wouldn't want to kill animals either, typically, even in this kind of situation. So you could say she'll eat a hamburger, but she doesn't want to kill the cow herself. Cassie returns the critter to its cage, and probably exemplifying why some people say never be roommates with your best friends, she reveals the various weaknesses Stephanie's body language revealed, including "Don't slaughter me, cow eyes." The news interrupts them, relaying the standard Talos message of "Now fight!" and how Batgirl was listed as the city's champion, not Black Bat or Robin. Red Robin? Weird, the previous stories didn't show the selections to be so picky. Tim retrieved Stephanie's suit, and Cass has been keeping it in secret, though never thought to wash it. And what better way to train someone who's out of practice for an impending ultimate battle than on a rooftop with your masks off? Steph seems to remember some of her skills, but still has a ways to go. She recalls her early days, how some might outclass her, but she was always a match for Tim. Perhaps in more ways than one? But Cassie calls her back to the present, just as Red Robin arrives, wanting to help, since it's quite likely Steph could lose, given her retirement. And this is the exact opposite of her recreation in Batman Eternal. This is more like Stephanie as she was when she started out. She didn't have all the skills or the answers. She never fooled herself into thinking otherwise. She puts on a brave front because she wants to help people, to stop the bad guy. She's not secretly helping him or cowing to an unlikable Mary Sue. People are flooding the streets, trying to leave the city with the dome gone, but the cops are keeping them at bay until it's known what lies beyond Gotham's new borders. The three young vigilantes swing to the police barricade at the bridge, and as tensions rise, and Batgirl is briefly unseen, She picks up a megaphone and threatens the crowd with a flash grenade that could blind them for at least 6 hours. It seems to do the trick of calming them down, mostly because they don't think to question why the heroes aren't wearing goggles. That's when a swarm of metallic-looking orbs grab Batgirl, calling her friends by their real names, and Tim does the same. Smart. As he and Cass try to anchor her down, only for all of them to be carried through a portal and dropped into the desert from the beginning, letting Gotham wait and see if they live or die. Funny, those orbs and the whole portal gimmick never showed up in the previous tie-in bouts. The opponents just ended up crossing over from one city to the other. The 2-page synopsis mentions Cassandra for a couple panels, then breezes through Stephanie's life from spoiler to Batgirl. It even mentions Damian Wayne having maybe a crush on her, though no mention that she herself previously held his job as Robin. Given the scuttlebutt that's gone around about how much one or more heads of DC don't like Stephanie, or Cassie for that matter, I think it's a wonder that any printing of them is this faithful to the characters at all. No. The cover for issue 2 sees Batgirl running up to Grodd, who restrains Black Bat in a really awkward pose. Is he trying to break her back with his stomach? Is she freeing herself by going limp like a toddler that doesn't want to go to bed? Anyway, we pick up with Grodd fighting Cassie as her friends and Catman arrive. We flash back to the previous day as the trio landed in the desert, 2/3 of them unexpectedly. Whether or not it's the same desert they saw before their abduction, Steph sees it as an arena for a game of the highest stakes, but their opponent is a no-show. However, as Red Robin notes, their captor wants a fight, so winning by default is out. Cassie calls for quiet, since as we see Catman watching from distance, anyone could hear them. Too bad they didn't think of that when they were shouting their real names in front of hundreds of citizens. But the possibilities begin weighing on Batgirl before Red R snaps her out of it, suggesting she consider it like an old-fashioned, middle-aged challenge of knights, all straightforward and such. Though Stephanie notes that plans don't always work out. For example, what if, like them, the other challenger had people tagging along as well? And sure enough, that's what happened as we snap back to the present. Score one more for improvised thinking. Can a crossover between Batgirl's crew and the cast of Whose Line Is It Anyway be far behind? Catman explains that in his reality, he'd gone to Gotham to stock up on weapons to fight Grodd. Incidentally, the girl was tracking him when they were trapped by the dome. On the plus side, Grodd's telepathy, super strength, and speech were nullified, so he was put in a zoo with an elderly female. That's a little odd. Taking away superpowers is one thing, but I was under the impression that Grodd, like other denizens of Gorilla City, simply evolved differently, so the dome shouldn't affect his speech. But talking or no talking, he'd still be as intelligent, I'd wager. After the dome fell, they were squaring off, with Catman ready to take them both out with an explosion if necessary. That's when the Silver Globes took them, instigating Seaman's bomb and knocking them both out until he woke in the desert to the Bat-Kids talking. Before Batgirl can answer if she'll help kill the ape, she sees Grodd about to rip Black Bat in two. The other half of the rent! Instead of a brave or condescending remark, or a bravado-filled quip, Batgirl offers herself in Black Bat's stead. Unfortunately, Grodd doesn't care and slams the girl into the ground. Red Robin attacks as Catman throws a knife in the primate's chest, but the former is smacked aside. B-Girl charges only to be grabbed by the hairy powerhouse, and thinking she's going to die, her thoughts trail back to the previous day. Red Robin pulling her from some falling rocks loosened by an earthquake, only for Cass to sort of kill the mood. As they look for a good resting spot, Red Robin wants to talk, but is reminded that Steph's attempts to talk to him in the past were rebuffed. She's upset that he didn't even find the words to officially break up with her, assuming it was because she quit the costumed life, just remaining silent. Tim says he didn't know what to say, but always cared about her, and maybe the job was possibly part of what formed their relationship. He's considering that being Batgirl again was thrust upon her, but hey, if she wants to get back together again, he's up for it. Steph tells him to figure it out on his own if he said something wrong or not, after she decks him.
I deserve that.
For as intelligent as Tim was, he wasn't above a stupid mistake. This is really more of a matter of choosing his words poorly. Did it deserve a right cross to the jaw? Gray area.
Back in the present, Steph doesn't want that to be her last memory of her and Tim, so she gives Grodd's face a taste of what it's like to get waxed while Catman slashes at the gorilla's back. Grodd psychically takes control of Red Rob, but he's quickly knocked out. Since it looks like they're losing, Steph suggests either she or Catman give up. That way the portals will take them to their respective homes and put an end to Grodd's threat. Since everyone he cared about is dead, Catsy agrees to take a losing strike, though I'm not sure why he had to take his mask off to do it. After quoting the band Queen, and Charlie Sheen to a lesser extent, they're carried off by the orbs, while Catman questions Grodd's, gorillahood. Wherever they've gone, our trio are dropped in an empty Gotham street.
Catman's dialogue is kind of confusing. I can't tell if the entire city he came from was deserted because Grodd killed them all, or Grodd only killed the people Catman cared about, and there were survivors when the two were taken that may or may not live now. And I guess it's questionable what kind of light this shines on Stephanie, given that city may or may not be doomed, and she was willing to sacrifice herself and thus her Gotham for it. Extreme circumstances?
Sometime later, Cass is lying in a hospital bed, her condition unchanged since they returned, and Tim offers the gift of honest-to-goodness coffee he picked up on the black market. The warrior girl awakens to her friends and pet guinea pig.
Oh, that reminds me. Cassie redodged that too, you flagrant fanfiction facsimile!
The two of them explaining in turn the events of the fight is too much for Cassandra, and she literally tells them to get a room. They leave, and Tim decides to go for the gusto and kisses Steph. Later, in a candlelit room, they begin to get intimate, possibly because of the end of the world and all, but their injuries linger, so they just hold each other. And if everything ended at that moment, that would have been fine for Stephanie Brown.
And that was Convergence Batgirl. The art is fine, but story-wise, I remember not liking it that much when I first read it. Though after a second go-through, it was much more enjoyable.
That said, it does suffer from a few details. It is great to see these characters without the deplorable reinventions latched onto them like leeches, and they feel mostly like they did before Flashpoint, with some exceptions. Tim's a little more clueless, but I think that was for B-Girl's revelation that she still loved him regardless. Yet that doesn't explain him smirking how cute she was in the fight with Catman, let alone acting so casual around the villain. I can understand the argument that Cassie wouldn't kill an animal for food, even if I'm not entirely on board, and I can see her getting an apartment with Steph since their one-time rivalry developed into a good friendship. Overall, I think the pacing did suffer from the non-linear fashion in which the story was told.
Steph had a few discrepancies herself, mentioning real names while in costume out in public and walking around without her mask, which seems kind of bush league for a crime fighter, and even though she did quit for a year, she spent several years being a crime fighter before then, so you'd think that would stick. Some of that, however, could be attributed to their unique situation, maybe making the cloak and dagger stuff feel a little less necessary.
Though I do question if Stephanie would have quit at all. There are times before she became Batgirl where she stepped away from the vigilante life. Getting pregnant, her mom finding out she was Spoiler, being fired from being Robin, or when her death was retconned as a ruse. And when that happened, it was explained that she returned to Gotham and crime fighting because she wanted to. She had the drive to help people who could not help themselves. I guess you could say that the extreme circumstance and the garish way of some people responding to the dome made her question what she was doing. Sure, telling off Killer Moth worked, but she'd have to know that not every villain would respond to her with bemusement. If that had been a certain clown with an acid-spraying flower or an explosive boxing glove gun, I would hope she'd have responded with a lot more punching, regardless of her newfound philosophy of thinking costumes make situations worse.
And it was odd enough that in so many stories that were located in one version of Gotham or another, none of them besides Flashpoint had a Batman. Weirder still is that we saw no trace of Joker, Penguin, Poison Ivy, or any number of other rogues that would relish the idea of a captive city.
For all the story's faults, these two comics managed to do these characters more justice than anything of post-Flashpoint's main canon. I know I criticized Tinian for throwing Tim and Spoiler Alert in bed together when he started on Detective, but in that context, their new 52 origins were still in play regardless of vague hints of something from pre-Flashpoint, so they hardly knew each other. Here, their context is one of a long-standing on-again, off-again relationship that's actually been developed. And even then, when it came down to it, it was enough for Stephanie just to be with someone she loved, not to indulge in some poorly constructed fanfiction-style CW moment done for cheap titillation or the hollow dramatics of Tim's fake death.
And that does it for our look at the Convergence tie-ins. DC is lucky I bothered with it all. I did find it a little odd that the only cities of focus were really relegated to being Gotham or Metropolis, and there was some confusion in the stories themselves that may have been cleared up had I read the miniseries proper. But I doubt it. Next week, we leave the big two of comics behind to focus on two of the biggest properties of the 1980s colliding. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.